Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I know it's an evening event, and I'm very surprised that we found more than 5 people at MIT who were able to come at this hour. Anyway, we're very grateful to the MIT Center for International Studies and the MIT Mexico program, as well as to UNAM Boston for hosting this event, Trade, Security, and Migration in U.S.-Mexico Relations. We've got 4 superstar panelists. So they're all eminently Googleable, so I'm not going to spend time on introductions. You can look them up if you want and admire their CVs. But we're gonna jump right into it. The only thing I want to do first is just introduce Javier Laguna, who's here from UNAM. You should stand up so they can recognize you, and anyone who wants to chat with him afterwards will be here. And we're very, very lucky to have Carlos Irgate, to the Consul General of Mexico in Boston, relatively recently arrived. So again, it's a tremendous honor, and thank you for joining us. So I have threatened our panelists with hellfire if they go beyond 6 minutes in their opening remarks. And the goal here is just to keep the opening remarks short, and then I will interrogate them, and they can interrogate each other, and we'll have time for questions from all of you. So this doesn't devolve into something like Catholic Mass pre-Vatican II, where we all speak in Latin and nobody else knows what's going on. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Diane.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm going to try to follow the instructions of Chap, a good friend from a long time back. So I'm happy to be. I used to teach at MIT in urban studies and planning, so I'm happy to be back here now. My 6-minute opening statement really is in response to one of the very great questions that Chap asked us to consider. So that's how I'll start. He asked us to think about what is working, if anything, and what is not working in Mexico. And let me just say that I work on questions, or I study and do research on questions of violence, impunity, and security that have brought me to various different territories in Mexico, starting from Mexico City, but bringing up to the border. So my remarks will be in general about those concerns with a specific focus on border or U.S.-Mexico relations with respect to security, and I won't say much about migration or trade, because I think we'll have some experts doing that. So what's working? So I just want to say that I'm super excited that Mexico has its first woman president in history. That's no surprise to anybody in this audience, who is extraordinarily popular, which is a really important thing if you want to take on big projects like creating more security. So that is an absolute fundamental starting point that Mexico is very fortunate to have President Sheinbaum at the helm. I also would like to say that I think she's showing signs of tentative but potentially impactful independence from López Obrador, and later you'll see why I think that's important. It has to do with security questions. So what's performatively working? So that's what's working. What's performatively working is that President Sheinbaum is towing a diplomatic line with the U.S. with respect to coordinating efforts to address ongoing concerns about cartel activities. And a lot of that's a performance, but it's a performative working for both parties. As late as August, she stated that the government did not have an agreement with the U.S. Department of the U.S. DEA on its so-called bold bilateral initiative, which was called Project Portero. So in August, she was not talking to the U.S., but by September, she was in public meetings and having press and visual coverage of her cooperation, or at least capacity to talk with Marco Rubio. So I think that's on the performative level, and let's see how far it goes, but I think that's relatively positive. What's holding promise, but with insufficient delivery so far, is allowing the extradition of cartel members from Mexico to the United States. It's not fully a first. We can remember Garcia Luna in 2020, but it was followed by a denial of extradition of Cienfuegos in 2021 by López Obrador. And so the fact that this is we've got cases where this is happening shows some opportunity for cooperation around security questions. And I would say that what's holding promise but still needs delivery is the nascent efforts to acknowledge the historical failures in security for the Mexican populace, with particular focus on the disappearances and the large number of disappearances. What's unclear, just two quick more points.
No,
yeah. I've got one, what's unclear about working, and then what's not working at all. So from my view, we all might have differences of opinion. What's unclear is the implications of the direct election of judges and justices. Now, among most people I speak to, especially lawyers, including a good friend of mine, Carla Quintana, who had worked in the López Obrador administration. We had her at Harvard a couple months ago. In legal circles, there is some horror about the direct election of judges. But I do want to say that I appreciate thinking about democracy and the judicial system. And part of the rhetoric of the direct election has to do with an acknowledgement of the importance of people's views about the justice system, as well as the fact that most of the elements of the justice system have been totally corrupted. That doesn't mean every judge, but the justice system as an assemblage of decisions and powers has not yielded a rule of law. So for me, and this is something I'd really love to discuss here, because I'm not a lawyer, I don't have a strong, I think we have to look at both sides. The problem of political capture in the current democratic ways in which judges are elected, but there was already political capture. So the question becomes, is it really that much worse? And I think that's an open question, and I just lay it on the table for future experts. That's why I want to say unclear. I don't want to be unpositioned. So, and then that leads me to my last point, which is what is not working at all. And that is an effective rule of law, both with respect to state cartel complicity, but also with respect to the workings of the judicial system, which has historically failed to serve as a counterbalance to institutionalized impunity in the police and the variety of police and the military. That's led to I don't need to, again, say to people here, has led to steadily accelerating violence built not just on struggles between cartels to control territory, but also in the context of state cartel and even state cartel violence. And a lot of that explodes at the border. That's not the only place where we have that kind of control over territory, control over supply chains, control over activities. But I do want to say that I won't give the data on the disappeared because that's also a problem spread all over the nation. But what I want to say is the problem with the ineffective rule of law, and this will be my last point, is that it has been so institutionalized in Mexico, and it traces to the 20s and 30s. And I do want to make a footnote and say a lot of my work, a lot of my views have to do with a project that I've worked on for the last 30 years, which is a book will be forthcoming, Oxford University Press, but it's going to take a couple more months because it's way too long, about the history of complicity and impunity in Mexico from 1910 to 2020. And I follow that. So my feelings about the judicial system owe to my deep analysis of archival records over the last 30 years. The last thing, that's my background, the last thing I want to say why I'm really concerned, and maybe this is more for Mexico than just the border, but obviously you can't subtract what the problems internal to Mexico with its capacity to work with its northern neighbors, is the fact that we're starting to see, and not really starting, but it's intensifying criminal gangs moving into new goods, new territories, new physical territories, but new things like the huachicoleros, like stealing natural resources, oil, water. So everything that's important for the export economy of Mexico and for livability in Mexico is being infiltrated by gangs because there's no rule of law. So that's maybe on the balance, a lot of things aren't working, but I'm hopeful about the new conversation with Rubio.
That's great. Can we pre-order your book?
Sure.
Okay, it's available to be
Now, it
pre-ordered.
is going to be a while,
Okay.
but yeah.
All right, Jorge, to you.
Yes. Well, thank you for inviting me. Thanks for Javier, Hector, and all, Griselda, of course, to invite us to meet me today. I have worked since 2019. I've been working since it was announced. Really, I've been working doing research on the Mayan train. Mainly, I have been working with Mayan communities and the impact the Mayan train has had on the communities themselves. But because I've been with this topic for a long time, I started to see many other things, especially in the southeast of Mexico. No? I mean, the changes that I've seen in the past 7 years have been pretty dramatic, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. I don't have 3 points like Diane. I have only one. I follow what Chap said.
Yeah, I did.
The Mayan train has emerged as a powerful symbol of how development, migration, and militarization intersect in Mexico's southern borderlands under intensifying U.S. pressure. While the Mexican government presents the project as a symbol of progress and tourism-driven development, its timing and implementation coincide with Washington demands that Mexico contain migration from its southern border and drug trafficking before it reaches the U.S.-Mexico border. Under both Trump and Biden, but especially sharpened during Trump's first presidency and intensifying during his second administration, Mexico has deployed its National Guard, tightened migration controls, and militarized its southern border. This has turned the same region promoted as a tourist paradise into a buffer zone, serving U.S. border interests, where luxury trains and hotels coexist with checkpoints, patrols, and policing of migrants. The growing pressure from the present U.S. administration, which demands that Mexico acts as a third border to stem northward migration and combat drug cartels, has had operating in a zone long dominated by powerful cartels, which have diversified their operations to control migrant smuggling routes and extort local businesses and tourism ventures. The Mexican government's efforts to maintain the Mayan train and other mega projects secure and at the same time foster economic development are constantly challenged by criminal organizations, even as the flow of migrants seeking to traverse the area continues, placing the region's profound social contradictions and violent tensions on a fast track to an uncertain future. The route of the Maya train cuts to Chiapas, Campeche, and Quintana Roo. These are the southeastern states of Mexico. They overlap with narcotics, arms, and human smuggling. In response, the Mexican government has expanded security forces along the route and inside the trains. And I actually had the opportunity this summer to take 3 weeks and tour take the train itself.
Okay, I'm jealous now.
Presented this was a strategy to safeguard infrastructure and as a part of a broader crackdown on organized crime. Yet the militarized approach has often worsened insecurity of local populations who face threats not only from cartel violence, extortion, and intimidation, but also from heavy-handed tactics of state security. Trump's approach was overly coercive, threatening punitive tariffs and the suspension of trade agreements unless Mexico acted as an enforcement buffer zone against what he called the caravans. This strategy did produce immediate results. The deployment of the newly created National Guard in states in Chiapas, Tabasco, and Campeche, while soldiers and militarized police units replaced traditional migration officials at checkpoints and detention centers. Under Trump, migration was framed as a national security threat, transforming immigration enforcement into a central feature of bilateral relations. Biden, though promising a more humane migration policy, reinforced these same dynamics through financial incentives, joint enforcement programs, and diplomatic negotiations that tie trade and security cooperation to Mexico's containment of migrants. Despite different rhetoric, both administrations have turned militarization into the price of maintaining bilateral cooperation. Migration in Mexico's southern border has done this. With the construction of the Mayan train, these flows intersect with a massive infrastructure project that promised to transform the region. At the beginning, the idea of the Mayan train was also some sort of it was going to be a kind of like a migrant barrier. The idea was that the flows from Central America, from the south, would be, directed towards the Mayan train, but then it didn't happen. I mean, yes, there are some. I mean, I did meet some Central American workers in the Mayan train, and Haitians, but the arrival of thousands of workers from other regions of the country and even from other nations, as well as soldiers, coupled with transient immigrants, complicated community life, creating new demands on local resources and reshaping social dynamics. The plan, in fact, U.S. pressure produced a dual militarized landscape. One aimed at controlling migration and the other at securing and protecting the new infrastructure. For communities, this meant an increased presence of armed forces in daily life, often blurring the line between security and surveillance. At the same time, Washington's growing insistence on expanding the war on drugs southward led Mexican authorities to justify militarization not only as migration control, but also a part of a regional strategy against the cartels. This layered mandate blurred the distinction between development security, migration enforcement, and narco-trafficking control, making militarization pervasive and normalized. One place that I stopped and where you can clearly see this militarization is in Palenque. Palenque is where López Obrador retired. That's where he lives now. And it looked like a Second World War movie. It really, I mean, you enter Palenque, you immediately see, many people dressing in military. You have checkpoints there. There's a new hotel, and the hotel is owned by the administration, by the army, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, you clearly see the militarization. That's one of the places where you clearly see this militarization of Mexico. Well, I don't know how much I have. A minute? Nothing. I just want to say one.
We will come back to you.
Yeah. Here, the last thing I want to say: the overlap of migration enforcement and migratory security underscores how development and militarization are now fused into a single-state strategy. By embedding armed forces into the everyday life of indigenous and local populations, the Mexican government has effectively normalized a militarized order that serves U.S. political interests, secures capital investment, and silences resistance to this, extractive development.
Thank you. I'm sort of succeeding here in my role as moderator. Okay, Sylvia, turning it over to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so very much for inviting me to this place. It's a sort of a dream come true, but I also want to say a word of recognition to my university because she has raised me as an expert in U.S. studies, and because I'm very proud that UNAM has a very important internationalization project, and this is the reason why UNAM is in Boston. So I want to thank the director of UNAM Boston that very kindly said, Silvia Núñez, you have to be at MIT. And I said, oh my goodness, they have upgraded me, so I will give it a try. And then let me tell you that I want to say some words that, of course, I wanted to mention security, but I think that for me the most relevant thing here is to express what I've been dreaming and thinking about, the very bad shape of the U.S.-Mexico relations. I think that our diplomatic relations are too old already. We have 203 years old. And I call it old because I regret very much that we have not been able to become the best neighbors nor fond friends. We remain as three countries that basically the US and Mexico are unequal partners in chiaroscuros. This is something that in my case I consider needs to be addressed by those like me that have devoted our life to study the issue, but whose work remain in the sphere of academics or the policy-making process, and we have not been able to bring together the peoples of these two countries. I think that, for me, should be the challenge number one to address, basically as a professor working with the young generations of Mexico. And I think that right now, the problems, there are too many problems that we have, but who has been getting all the benefits of this relation? Of course, the politicians, the businessmen, and in terms of the politicians, I think that they are pretty much installed in looking about their own audiences, their own nations, and what they want is to continue exercising power and not to think about how well can these two countries become together. So in terms of migration, for me, the most relevant thing to observe is that we have millions of people in suffering. The ones who have been divided because their families, some of them remain in the United States and have been deported. Many, families turn apart, but also the stranded migrants in Mexico. I think that this is a problem that needs to be addressed between the two countries, because Mexico by itself cannot do better for these migrants. We consider that these 900,000 encounters in 2024 is telling you the dimension about these stranded people, irregular migrants in Mexico, that include lots and lots of children. The number of children irregular migrants have been raising up. And I think that it's good enough to mention about this situation. Of course, the Mexican government has been striving to have a more perfect migration governance. They have been working with different provinces of Mexico with the support of the IOM. Mexico has a fantastic project in the paper. As sometimes I say that my country has many projects in paper like Sweden, but we are not Sweden. And we have to recognize that the Mexican government doesn't have the means for this so idealistic migration governance, because they are offering from health to education, jobs, etc. And we have all these stranded migrants not having the support they deserve. We recently had a mobilization of them demanding better conditions. This is creating in Mexico also another challenge that is not being talked openly spoken, basically outside Mexico, that I think is also very relevant to highlight here. That is that in Mexico also we have been growing all these anti-immigration sentiments and xenophobia. For example, there was a survey in 2024 by Opinión Pública, and this has been also released by UNHCR. And what this survey found is that 52% of the responders in Mexico agreed that the presence of refugees and irregular migrants in our territory increases crime. Mm-hmm. They believe that they increase crime in their cities. Plus another 30% of them said that the Mexican government should only allow them to transit quickly through Mexico. I am working with a student that is working on African migrants in Mexico, and they have such a terrible situation because Mexico doesn't even have diplomatic relations with many of the countries they come from. So it has been recognized that around 77 different nationalities are now crossing into Mexico. Such nationalities include Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, many countries of Africa, etc. And well, to end my comments, let me just tell you that I think that some experts in Mexico at UNAM has discussed that because Mexico accepted to become the country that was going to contain, to stop these flows of human mobility, Mexico has become, in reality, el país muro. Is such a buffer zone in terms of doing the job for the United States. And I think that this issue needs to be addressed because although Mexico highlights all the time that our migration policy is being written over the basis of protecting human rights, that is not happening. There was an interesting session at the DMW in Geneva last April, and Mexico failed the test when talking about migration governance in the country. So I think that, as it was mentioned here, organized crime is the most strong force right now in Mexico in terms of profiting from all these irregular migrants transiting into Mexico. But still, my dream can come true. I do dream that our relationship needs to be beyond, not only beyond borders, but needs to be sought between the people and of Mexico and the United States. For doing that, I think that we have not done good enough when we talk about higher education. There are many projects to deal with the U.S.-Mexico relation, many projects to deal only from here to study Mexico, and some in Mexico to study the United States, but we have not been able to have a very ambitious program of bringing together our students in order to build a better future. I think that all of us who are here, we all are convinced that it is exactly what is needed, and there is an amazing love story about the love of a Mexican man and a woman from the United States that I will keep for my last comment at the end of this.
That's great. You've been threatening that reveal from the beginning, but I can't wait to hear it. So we've covered security, we've covered migration. I can't think of any other topics that are. Oh yes, trade. Please take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. MIT, UNAM Boston, UMass Boston, it's quite an honor and a pleasure to be here. Particularly talking about a topic that I have been following with great interest, which is the current trade relation between Mexico and the United States. And I think that it's quite interesting because of three main ideas that I will follow the three main ideas rule here. Three main ideas that I want to address that are first, how this relation helps to understand the transition from globalization to slowbalization, as the IMF is named. Second, at what extent this relation helps to understand that we are in a sort of post-global world, maybe a new international order. And finally, however, how, despite this changing situation, Mexico seems to be in an exceptional situation that may represent some advantages for the institutional development in the country regarding its US relations. So let's start with the first idea. From globalization to slowbalization. When the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was approved in 1994, the word of the moment was globalization, was free trade, was liberalization. And NAFTA signals these new times. However, when the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, was approved in 2020, the times were quite different. The globalization was not longer the institutional idea dominating the economic order. The IMF was already pointed out signals of slow pace in international trade, something that the pandemic aggravated, hence the name slowbalization. This treaty was approved when the international trade was moving toward what is called geoeconomic fragmentation that has to do with nearshoring. We will be talking about this later on. So already the USMCA represented new times that couldn't be labeled simple as globalization, as free trade, or a liberal international order. Of course, the situation has evolved, and today, I think that we are in a transition in a, as I mentioned, post-global order. Some has called the post-World Trade Order momentum. This new international order favors domestic sovereignty and economic security. Because, and this is something that is very present in the Trump administration policy known as America First policy, economic security is national security. So we are moving toward the securitization, if I can use this complex expression, of international economic relations. And this is why bilateral relations are preferred to multilateral relations. And if there is enough political space, unilateral relations are preferred towards bilateral relations. And this is what is happening right now with the trade relation with Mexico, because we have still in force the USMCA. We have a very important review process in July 2036. I would love to talk about what could happen afterwards. But this is first layer. But in the second layer, the United States have been acting unilaterally to impose tariff beyond the, let's say, bilateral or multilateral framework. And for that purposes, President Trump has relied on what is called in the United States constitutional law the unitary executive theory, meaning basically that the president has expanded powers to conduct foreign relations. And this is why many of those tariffs have been based on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. Some of them are based on national security provisions, but mostly of the problems are caused by emergency powers claimed by President Trump. The Supreme Court, by the way, will hear a case in November about that. We may talk something on what could happen with the Supreme Court and how the Supreme Court can or cannot change this unilateralism. Final remarks. Despite these complications, I think that Mexico is in an exceptional situation. Why Mexico is in an exceptional situation? Sylvia talked about a love story. Well, money is a manifestation of love. I am a Beatles fan. There is a beautiful song by the Beatles, "Can't Buy Me Love." Well, yeah, but you can buy something very close to love. I have some figures, some numbers about the trade relation that I retrieved from the U.S. Commerce Department. Listen to this. In 2024, more than 20% of Mexico's total goods export were sent to the United States, 80%, while 40% of its total import came from the United States. That is amazing numbers. The United States-Mexico merchandise trade was approximately $840 billion in 2024. That is too much money to waste. So what I'm trying to say is that beyond globalization, beyond the post-global order, beyond emergency powers claimed by President Trump, Mexico will be there as a preferred commercial partner for the United States. There are some opportunities. I hope to have the opportunity to talk about this window of opportunity. For instance, chips, for instance, critical minerals. There are some challenges, for instance, institutional constraints in Mexico. Very interesting, your remarks on rule of law and judicial reforms. I hope to talk a little bit about that. But my main conclusion is that I do not think that nearshoring regarding US and Mexico is going to die. No, it's going to survive these turbulent moments. The key challenge is how this nearshoring can be used to promote prosperity, particularly in Mexico. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks. So I will first interrogate each of our panelists very briefly, and then we'll turn it over to you all. So there'll still be plenty of time for questions. And I'm going to ask everybody just limit their remarks to, if not sound bites, 1 minute. right? So, and I'm going to tell everybody what their questions are, and then they can contemplate. So, Jorge, militarization, deployment of more coercive forces, trying to balance the fact that there's undocumented migration occurring at the same place where you want to develop economically and also maintain tourism is very complicated. Do you have a better solution than the one that the administration is currently proposing? You don't have to answer yet. I'm going to give everybody their question first. Diane, yep. So do you have an answer? Because I agree with you on the diagnosis 100%. It's the same diagnosis that I think we've been giving for almost 20 years, that the security problem in Mexico is devastating and that the cartels are entrepreneurial and they will continue to take over more and more of the legitimate economy, in addition to the illegitimate economy, and they will exercise, at some level, political influence proportional to their economic clout. And yes, individual leaders may fall or be extradited, but as long as that trade remains, so will the distortions economically and potentially politically as well. Okay, Sylvia, also, I'm sorry, do you have an answer? To the stranded migrants, what should be done with the 900,000 people who are currently in Mexico, given that, I think as you correctly diagnosed, Mexico does not have the resources to treat them at a sort of Scandinavian level. Right, that is just sort of unrealistic, and I think it's also unrealistic to imagine that other countries will really help, especially the United States. Canada may contribute, a few Canadian dollars, but it won't solve the problem in any way. And then for Jose Ignacio, something a little bit different. When I originally imagined the Trump administration talking about decoupling from China, which sounded like a reasonable strategy and was endorsed by a broad spectrum of American academics and policymakers, it seemed like it could go one of two ways. The first was nearshoring to North America and really creating a full-fledged North American supply chain across multiple commodities, not just automobiles, and digging in on that. And maybe electronic components will still be sourced from Asia, at least for the time being, but ultimately maybe we would move that industry back to the hemisphere as well. The other alternative was just to say we're decoupling from China, but there will be no special preference for North America. My sense is that they're taking that second road. Tell me why I'm wrong, and if so, what if I'm not wrong, whether we can feel auspicious about the future for U.S.-Mexico trade. All right, go ahead.
Am I going first?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're going first.
Well, let me just, spoiler alert, it can't be 1 minute, because you asked me a question about what can be done with a cartel, but I will try to summarize.
We can't do anything.
I'll try to, just give me a few minutes. But let me just say that my response to you is going to build on three things that I heard from my peers here. I loved everything that everyone said. Thinking about militarization, thinking about our good versus bad neighbor relationships, and the third one, what you call globalization or whatever, thinking about the nature of the economic relationships between the two countries. So I had originally thought about two answers. I have a two-pronged answer to this thing about what to do with respect to the kind of institutionalization of impunity. And again, let's just talk about diagnosis, not implementation, and how possible they are. But I guess the first thing that I wanted to say is restructure the security apparatus to rid it of the legacies of impunity, which means to keep on militarizing and adding more and more and more military forces. So part of the problem, I argue, about impunity, institutionalization of impunity, is that constant effort to kind of solve a problem of corruption and security in one force by creating another force. So over the last 70 years, the history of the evolution of a security apparatus is the problem. So how you actually streamline a security, but the one thing you do not create a new National Guard. You do not empower the Navy on top of the judicial, the police, preventative police, the military. Everybody has their territory and everybody's control. So it has to do with an institutional streamlining to demilitarize kind of the security apparatus. The second point that I wanted to make that I think could be connected to this is, and it really builds on what Jose said, I talk a lot about, for me, the big problem of the neighbor relationship is the problem of sovereignty. The doubling down on whose sovereign power controls what territory. I'm not questioning the Westphalian nation state, but with respect to the U.S.-Mexico, I argue in my forthcoming book that the history of that relationship is part of the security problem. It's like who gets in whose territory, who determines who does what on what territory. So my second answer, and I'm happy to embellish more if there are questions, is I would like to think about regional cooperation at the border. Not U.S.-Mexico only. This is, of course, the prompt of this meeting. I wanted to mention that I'm the co-chair of the Mexico Faculty Committee at Harvard, the David Rockefeller Center. Could have put it up there. We just had a conference last year on U.S.-Mexico relationships. The amount of goodwill there is between U.S. and Mexican mayors and people and businesses at the border is incredible. They're living in the kind of the world of cartel, but they are also building economies. People are moving back and forth every day. So this is where I want to end with your comment about kind of rethinking, not nearshoring or whatever, rethinking a new territoriality of sovereignty, of shared sovereignty, a shared fate across the border. And who cares what Donald Trump says about that? And who cares? I don't know what Claudia would say about that, or Donald and Claudia, but the point is that there is will, and there is money, and there are bodies. I teach in regional planning, but I think that that's something that needs to be followed along. And let me just say that the restructuring of the security apparatus could be thought with that in mind. Could we do new regional security apparatuses instead of a national one that has everybody that has power at every part of the territory? Because you can't control that. I'll stop.
All right.
Well, I mean, yes, I agree with Diane in that the idea is not putting more, another layer of militarization, and another. I mean, we have seen what has happened lately with the Guardia Nacional, for example, but I don't see this. I don't see this thing stopping. I really don't see. Actually, at the beginning, López Obrador was actually kind of like saying that he was going to demilitarize. He was talking of maybe less, but then immediately, Trump came in with all these demands, and it was obvious for at least for López Obrador at that time that he needed more military than this. If you see what is today, to me, the Mayan train is a perfect example of a project taken as hostage by these forces, and particularly by the demands of U.S. It has and unfortunately, yeah, I think Claudia has been. I have heard in Mexico, sabe capotear. Sabe capotear. Means that, capotear means that, a matador, a bullfighter capotear, no? He knows how to, put the bull here and put the bull there. But I don't know. She's gonna get hit one day. I don't think, she has been good at so far, but I don't know if this is going to. And then I'll end with this. In this part that this tour that I did of the Mayan train, it's not only that the Sedena, the army, had complete control of the train. Now they also have 6 5-star hotels there. So instead of reining in the army's power, it's giving more independence to the army. And I don't know really if it's very difficult to say how successful, efficient the army has been in controlling. I saw what I saw in Chiapas, for example, is much more like looking through undocumented workers coming in than really doing anything about the drug traffic. So I'm very pessimistic. The love story, love story.
We're about
the
to
love
have
story,
the
the
love
love
story. Hear the love story.
I'm very pessimistic about that too. I don't see. what I see is a Mexico that is being more and more curtailed in doing their own decision making because of these demands that are continually, kind of like coerced.
I got to hear the love story now. Are you going
You
to tell
want
us
me
the
to-
love story?
Yeah.
Or you
Well,
can, all right.
let me just mention that I agree absolutely on what Diana has mentioned. There is the money. I think that lots and lots of money every year goes up. No, Mexico is also investing a lot of money in the military, the Guardia Nacional, but we know that this is not working in the real world. No, I do believe that business is needed, that economics matter. But we also need to start we need the glue to try to, this will take generations to come, no? To try to build a different relation with the people of the United States. Before coming here, I said, Mexico says that we have many friends in the United States. And I said, what are they? Maybe, many will, but they are not organized. We don't even have different networks of professionals coming together. Let's start thinking about transnationally. I cannot change the world in a day, but if I believe that the same forces are going to be at the front, as the frontliners in this story, this is truly, for me, something very critical. What I see in Europe, with all the mistakes and whatever, that borders in Europe started to bring down, and that has created a different, very different story among the younger generations, because also they have new actions in terms of intermarriages. We need to track all that story down, no, in order to do something different, and not to get trapped again in politics, because our relationship is always trapped when we have all these political elections. And so we need to think out of the box, and I think it is truly possible. It is truly, we need it, because otherwise what is happening, I'm pretty much afraid of what is happening in academia in Mexico. We used to have many experts focusing on US-Mexico relations, and that number in Mexico is coming down. And you know what number is going up in terms of interest? China. We have many scholars that decided to quit, and they are now focusing in China, and there are many followers in China, because China is putting a lot of money into them, for them to travel to China and to become, they admire China. But I do understand very clearly that America, Mexico, and the United States, we still have common values. One is democracy. And I think that it is the right moment for us to forge a very strong alliance in order to defend our future. I don't know if we are going to end up with a southern border being the only border. That could be possible, but of course, we need to start with a different narrative beyond what you mentioned, that I'm absolutely against, talking about sovereignty, like in the 1920s. Exactly. That is non-existent, and that is only a myth that perpetrates, nationalism, and that is not very helpful. Thank you.
Well, China, that's a great topic and a great question. My short answer, and I will use my minute and I will talk just for a minute, believe me, I'm a lawyer. I think that at least the intention, the plan of the United States is to isolate China, and for that, United States is going to try at least to build a new relation with the Western Hemisphere, and particularly Mexico. What I'm trying to say is that Mexico could be the winner in this post-China world. Certain conditions apply. I have been studying the China-Latin American relation for a while, and I have a different perspective because most of the interest is based on the supply, and I am more interested in the demand side. What I'm trying to say is this. China, of course, become the principal lender and financial supporter for Latin America. That's the supply side of the problem. But let's think for a while what is happening or what happened in the demand side. Why Latin America turned to China? It was not, it's my interpretation, due to ideological policy, perspective, or cultural identities. It was because China fulfilled a role that the multilateral institutions and United States failed to do. Meaning China was able to advance in Latin America and Mexico in particular due to the failure of multilateral institutions and the United States. For Mexico, it was easy to receive financial aid from China than from the United States or from the Inter-American Development Bank or for the World Bank. So if the United States is interested in change that, it needs to really increase the way through which the United States can support development in Mexico and more generally in Latin America. And I have been following, and I am quite excited about this, and this is an ongoing news, the financial agreement between the United States and Argentina, $20 billion supporting Argentina. And I have to say, I am absolutely happy for this deal because this could signal a new relation between the United States and Latin America. 10 years ago, it would have been China, the one that said, don't worry, you need $20 billion, this is for you. Indeed, Argentina is, I guess, pretty sure about this. The only country that, as for today, has two swap lines, one with the United States, one with China. Amazing. And I think that going back to Mexico, Mexico is trying to figure out what is happening, and I think that is reaching a similar conclusion that what I am explaining. President Sheinbaum take a very bold decision, but very smart one in my opinion, to impose tariff on Chinese goods, meaning Mexico is replicating the United States policy towards China. This is a clear signal that Mexico is aligned with the United States policy towards China, which will create an opportunity for nearshoring. I do not like that word. I am not figured out a new word. I am trying to think about that. But to conclude, I think that in a new post-Chinese world, Mexico could be the winner, but of course we'll need to work on some aspect, particularly regarding institutional capabilities in Mexico.
Excellent. So before we go to the floor, I am going to use moderator's privilege and offer a slightly different answer to my own question about security, because I think I see it differently. I think it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. I think if the problem you're trying to solve is takedown of cartel leaders, then the practice that has been developed over the last 15 years of vetted, sequestered military units, specially trained by the United States, works very well for these targeted operations. And then if you're trying to talk about things at the border, I think collaborative border management, as I've written about, and my boss from government, Alan Burson, has written about, works terrifically well with paired patrols between the ports of entry and then close collaboration at the ports of entry between the officials on each side. If you're talking about cartels, well, I mean, the United States has more drug traffickers than Mexico has, but we don't have cartels, right? We have small gangs and there are regular takedowns of these gangs, and then another gang emerges to fill the place of that gang, but nothing like cartels. And why? Well, I think it has to do with political corruption. So unless that is at the center of any effort for law enforcement, you will never succeed in this kind of local level security. That's, and kind of wake me up when 5 governors and 17 mayors are busted and put in jail or extradited to the United States. Then I think we will have progress on the third dimension. That is my heretical point. So let's go to the floor, please, in the back. And say who you are and your relationship to this august group.
Hi, my name is Mariel. I'm a student here at MIT, a proud graduate of UNAM, and I study the socio-technical research, the socio-technical history of surveillance in Mexico, of government surveillance. And in the context of security and militarization and thinking of where all this money is going with this explosion of budget, both in the US and Mexico, I think a lot of the community here in the United States that's seeing this explosion in budget, an open wallet, and no oversight over technological acquisitions that extract migrants' data, Mexican migrants' data, their faces, genetic data, fingerprints, biometrics, and how there is this capacity here that's just exploding in collecting all of this information for immigration enforcement. And so then we look to Mexico, and I wonder what you think that President Sheinbaum's administration is going to do with this. If they will follow this trend to make similar acquisitions of, data analytics and surveillance software that allows the Mexican state to similarly surveil immigrants and dissidents, because we know in Mexico it's journalists and the families of people for forced disappearance. Or if we think that there will be more resistance to buy into this game of buying the better tech to surveil more people.
Cool. Does anyone want to take a swing at that?
Well, I would say that we are just going to play the same game.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
I would say that back under Marcelo Ebrard, when he was mayor of Mexico City, they put a very high-tech surveillance sets of cameras in Mexico City. And so this links to the economy. It's not just the government's making this decision. This is one of the few ways that the educated private sector in Mexico, not the only, there's still some manufacturing, but this train is out of the station. And people are using this technology to grow the economy.
And can I complicate the question? The cameras in Mexico are all Chinese. What does that mean for U.S.-Mexico relationships?
I would just say that,
I
to
don't
me,
understand.
the legibility is an imperative of the state, and the collection of biometric data is by itself unproblematic. And most countries in the world have a national identity card with biometric data.
Yeah.
Mexico has the equivalent with the INE card, and the United States is perverse and peculiar in the fact that it doesn't have such a document. The problem becomes when you marry the biometric data with biographic data, with geolocated data, right, and do it in real time. And I don't think we're anywhere near there in Mexico, so I guess my level of concern is much lower at this point. But you wanted to complicate the question.
Oh, no, just that the cameras are Chinese.
Oh, the cameras are Chinese, yeah.
Can I say one thing? I mean, it's a very old comment, and it's not relevant, and you're here at MIT, and you've got all the latest, don't get me started on technology. But I do want to say that when I was teaching at MIT, I started studying police. I was looking at, and I also want to say, Chap, that when I'm talking about the security sector, I'm not just talking about mayors and city police. We're talking about judicial police. They are all over the nation. They're nationally. So we're talking. It's the corruption and the impunity is at the absolute highest national level. So, but when I was studying this problem at MIT, I remember raising the question. I was interviewing police, et cetera, in Mexico City. Like, what would it be possible to give all this surveillance technology to citizens to surveil the police? I could see that. That's probably not possible now, but it's a matter of getting ahead of, here you folks at MIT with the technology, getting ahead of the curve for either the corporations or the military to be using it in their own interest and distribute it.
Yeah. Excellent. Other questions, please.
Good evening, Mateo Rulgarza. I work in immigration for a local politician, so this is very, very interesting. Originally from Mexico, but have been here for maybe 10 years now. My question is for Professor Davis. You were speaking about, and I missed the beginning of your introductory remarks, but you were talking about some kind of regional cooperation at the border. And it made me think, I was listening to Throughline, which is like an NPR podcast, and they were talking a little bit about the history of border-town relationships between the U.S. and Mexico. And, you know, based on what I learned in that podcast and a little bit of history, I know, you know, it was not always as callous. And it was definitely not always as heartfully delineated in terms of a wall, in terms of checkpoints, in terms of an entire branch of the federal government in the United States side being devoted to border security. Do you think that kind of like the federalization of, again, border security enforcement with ICE, with the Department of Homeland Security at large post 9/11, do you think that that has largely, in a way, kind of complicated or even made things worse in terms of finding long-term solutions to border relations and border security between the two countries?
Thank you for that question. And I didn't, when I started my remarks, I didn't thank Griselda and everybody for, you know, organizing this. It's amazing. It's really a wonderful table. I'm very happy to be here. I think that, I just want to say I used to be the kind of editor of the handbook on sociology in Mexico, focused on sociology in Mexico for the U.S. Library of Congress, or a handbook on Latin America a long time ago. And I remember reading almost 15 to 20 years ago the amount of work that's done on the history of cooperative relationships across the U.S.-Mexico border, the language, the culture, the music, and there's, of course, the economy. So you are right. Historically, it's there. And I didn't grow up on the border, but people who grow up on the border, the fluidity in their everyday life is amazing. And it's there in their hearts and their minds. We have ICE now that is really creating a problem, but I know it's like overly optimistic, but and it's not only around these problems, but I think that in the contemporary era, we need to move beyond sovereign nationalism, and we have to start thinking at different, I'll repeat it because I'm writing a lot about this, different territorialities of governance. And I think there is an opportunity. The history of the border gives us that opportunity. If anybody's interested, I'm moderating a panel that UCSD is doing on border relations in California next Friday. But the point is, there are efforts on both businessmen, universities, people on both sides of the border to have a different conversation. They're probably purposely keeping it under the radar screen because Claudia, the Trump administration and the Sheinbaum administration have to talk to represent the nations. But if we can do more at that border. So one last thing, sorry to be going on, but you see I'm passionate about this topic. What brings people together besides history, culture, et cetera? The other thing that I happen to be working on in other territories besides the U.S.-Mexico border is water. And the relationship between U.S. and Mexico can be transformed if the conversation around this new regional kind of cooperation brings not just economic trade or, you know, kind of some of the other things that we talk about, but understanding the life and death of entire swaths of both of the nations if there cannot be cooperation around water. I think there can be more cooperation on water than on like limiting the supply and demand of drugs, et cetera. They've tried that, it hasn't happened. What we need to do, we all need to do, is find out what are those things that everybody can agree on at that border. And that could maybe spill over to the larger U.S.-Mexico relations. I will be the first to acknowledge that it's not going to be that easy, because just as much as there's solidarity and cooperation at the border, we know some of those border states are red states. But if you come down to people's livability, it's not the capital, it's not in the capital of Austin, it's not in Arizona. You could find cooperation. And I'm rambling a little bit. I thank you for the question. I think we have to look for other ways to move beyond the fear that ICE is instilling in the kind of cooperative relationships that have existed for centuries.
Thank you so much.
I will just editorialize that, obviously, if we were serious in the United States about deterring undocumented migration or encouraging the self-deportation of people who are here illegally, we would simply have an employer sanctions regime. And we wouldn't need any of this other stuff and all the ICE border enforcement and all the stuff that's being done at the border, ICE interior, and at the border is theater, right? Because it's not designed to actually solve the underlying problem. And the same thing, I think, is true of other, quote, border-related problems like drugs. I mean, if we cared at all about reducing demand for drugs and reducing, therefore, the consumption of drugs, we would have expanded drug testing in the workplace. Right? And that would solve the problem, and we would not have to worry about things at the border. So these are relatively obvious and straightforward issues if you can leave behind the thicket of hype around them. Okay. Others? And if there are no others right now, then I'm going to provoke the panel again with a question about what they would do if they had a magic wand. Una varilla mágica, if you've got it, and you get to wave it only once. Right? And you can wave it at any aspect of Mexican political economy, or you can wave it at the bilateral relationship. I mean, I know what mine is, but I won't prejudice you. But why don't we go in the same order as before, and you can have your wave.
Okay, well, I've already given my wave, which is the regional cooperation.
That's right, okay.
But I do want to just add one sentence more, and I would love to hear from everybody else. So I think that in addition to thinking about history, culture, the everyday livability, how many people go back and forth every day, kids go to school, they live on one side, they go to school on the other. I mean, the fluidity, the porosity of the border, and there's a lot of really interesting artwork on that, Ronaldo Royale at Berkeley, et cetera. But what I want to add into that, just to build on that last point about water, that a possible pathway towards progress for a new territorial governance is to think about water, energy, and other ecological issues. But think about those first at the border. And that's where you can think about energy without thinking about water and vice versa. There is a lot of discussion now on the US side about like data centers, et cetera. But to do data centers for our economic competitiveness, we need water, and that water is shared. A lot of that water is shared across the border. And I guess I want us to think about ecological issues as the basis for solidarities and a shared future. And it's a different, I mean, we know Mexico has oil, energy, that's a part of the reason the climate change wasn't embraced so much by López Obrador, et cetera. But if we think about the nation with all these different ecologies, and water is a problem everywhere, by the way, and I work on Mexico City, so don't need to tell anybody. The city is a disaster with respect to too much and not enough water. But the fact that there might be a particular combination of water, energy, and other ecologies at the border could create new forms of political conversation that would be different than the standard, speaking for the whole nation, that Mexico and the U.S. do. So I'll end there, but that's a magic wand. We need experimentation and new ideas and new issues. We can't keep on talking about migration and NAFTA and security. We need something else.
Well, two things. First, what you say about these kind of like instances of cooperation in the border, no? that you mentioned that it could be some sort of a positive. I think this is completely being counter by what Jose Ignacio talked about unilateral.
Yeah.
I mean, what I see right now is more and more that growing. So it's you're optimistic, I'm pessimistic. And then I wanted to address the idea of, I agree completely with you about the ecological part. But, I really saw this in Yucatan. I mean, in the Mayan, it was a disaster. I mean, the way that, talking about water, all the cenotes were completely, it was, and there was really not much of there were some sort of, there was a few, organizations, but not many American organizations. Actually, there were more European organizations, some indigenous, some Mexican organizations, that kind of like counter the what was going on. But it was, I don't see this, you were talking, Silvia, about, well, we have all these friends and we should put something together, and all this. I don't see them coming together. I mean, for example, for the migrants, you see a few local, instances of, but what I saw in the border, this time that I went, was growing xenophobia. Instead of migrant, some sort of like, trying to help migrants, or yes, there were some instances that there were some, and they're very, they're very famous because they're the only ones that are around. We went to see them and stuff, but I didn't see this growing. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but that's what I am pessimistic. And this this kind of like very internal way of dealing with Mexico. I see Mexico. I don't know if your exceptionality, it's exceptional because we are so close to each other and we're so interpenetrated, But it's very asymmetrical, and that's the problem.
So it's my turn?
Te toca.
Not yet, the love story, but I will tell.
I'm still waiting on the love story.
That will end it.
That sounded like a magic
Let me
wand.
tell you that following the conversation to what Diana has said, I think that we could start by developing sort of a different pilot projects. Mm-hmm. One of them that I would enjoy very much and could be kind of an easy task is that try to incorporate at the level of elementary school a unit of study all along the 5 years. Meet your neighbor. Maybe the Canadians will feel upset, so meet our neighbors. Huh? I don't want to discuss what is going on with North America. That was Bob's pastor, but I think it is relevant. But I think that meet your neighbors and establish one day of let's celebrate our common values with Americans and Mexicans. But a very important one, that could be. I mentioned that at the Woodrow Wilson Center once. We should have a soccer team of Canada players, Canadian, Mexican, and U.S. as North America, the team North America. To ignite passion, we are going to have the World Cup. So we are looking at all these possibilities, to think about out of the box. And why I want to do that, precisely because of what you're saying. We are transiting very difficult and dark times. And I cannot accept that that Darth Vader is going to be the one who wins the game. It will take a lot of time. And for that reason, I will tell you the story. I was trying to find, and I asked myself, what has been the most glorious moment of U.S.-Mexico relations? There is no. You explore, and not even one that can be celebrated by the two nations. And then I remember that I wrote a small paper for Voices of Mexico about the relevant women in the history of the United States. And I came to recognize that the most relevant love story is that one of Alma Reed, the journalist, and Felipe Carrillo Puerto.
Claro.
That is truly a love story that we need to remember. Please.
Wait, say more.
This woman so in love with a married The Yucateco, but Mexican.
Yeah.
You know, I have to say it. Yucateco, but
no
Mexican.
question.
huh?
That's right.
But he, you know, he was married, but they were so much in love that he decided that he was going to divorce, and so they were planning
Yeah,
to
that's
get
right.
married. And unfortunately, he was murdered. No, antes de la boda, before
And
the
there are
wedding.
rumors that she was a traitor.
And she was the murderer?
No, that she told, we can talk about
But it
that.
was a love story.
I know.
What happened with love?
That was the great reveal?
Love could be dangerous.
But she was so much in love
No, I agree.
with Mexico that devoted her life to work with Mexican peasants in the United States, with workers. So that is truly, for me, a very memorable story. Netflix should have it.
Yes.
No, definitely.
Because what I have seen is Ozark is the one
Yeah, the
that
one that-
portrays,
Yes.
The Ozark, yeah.
you know, how relevant is Mexico and the United States.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm truly convinced
Yes.
that we have the energy, but we need to build, let's say, a transnational social hub of the coalition of the willing, committed into a brighter future of Mexico beyond whatever can happen. I think that it is precisely the best moment to do so for America and Mexico.
You have much greater ambitions than I do. I just want to be invited to the consul's Dia de los Muertos party. That's all. Hoping that institution is resurrected. I'm sorry, Jose, I want to get to you, but we have a question.
Hi.
Go ahead.
My name is Jesus Miguel, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher in chemical engineering here at MIT. And I do like the idea of soccer, but I would also like to bet on maybe education as well. So something I've observed that happens with a lot of researchers from India and China, for example, is that despite the relationships that the US and these countries have, there's a lot of researchers here who are prominently Indian and Chinese. I think that one possible solution would be to bet on a research at the undergraduate level and promote the admission of Mexican researchers directly to US institutions to create that transnational bridge. Most of the Mexican people that I have the honor and privilege to interact with mostly come from privileged backgrounds. And I think we could focus a lot of efforts on creating these bridges at the undergraduate level on multiple areas, not only STEM, but also arts and the humanities, so that the people who do not come from not privileged backgrounds could have that access. They would have the visa and they would have the stipends from the doctoral programs, for example, in that way creating an incubator for future development. So I think it would be worthwhile having a conversation, but I'm not sure if, my question would be how, in this framework of education, is that something that could be possible? What ideas come to mind with this thought? Thank you.
For me?
Well,
Yes.
comments
Yeah.
are just as welcome as questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
You shouldn't feel the need to disguise a comment as a question if you don't
Well,
want to.
just I would say that what I have realized that doing this at the level of higher education, it is too late. We need to begin with elementary school teachers understanding, meet your neighbor. No? What is going on is that people doesn't even know the next door neighbor. No? And so the other problem, to be very honest, although I might be politically incorrect, is that we are suffering a lot in Mexico because of brain drain. So I would like to see our highly talented having the possibility, as happened in Israel, that some scholars who have been invited to the United States have like dual, let's say, affiliation and can spend half a year in the United States in a very prestigious institution, but the other half, they go to Israel. And so I think that Mexico really needs that because we cannot afford to have, and this is happening a lot, we cannot afford to lose our human capital. We need also that our institutions could be, well, would be better in Mexico. There are some very good ones, such as UNAM, but we do not see many Americans that would be willing to spend some time in our university. Sometimes they say that because they do not speak Spanish, but that doesn't matter. I mean, they can learn. I mean, it is not so difficult. And so we are trying with all these. There is a project that you can have bilateral courses on Zoom. One professor here, I did this with a professor from George Mason University, but my students were there under a very voluntary, no grades to this project, and that was truly fantastic for both my students in Mexico and the ones in George Mason. And let me tell you some anecdote. The big deal was in which language this exercise would take place. So I went to talk to my students, and they told me it doesn't matter. It can be in English or Spanish. The ones from George Mason, they said no. Some knew Spanish, but they didn't want to speak it. So it was our Mexican students, the ones that made this. It was a great effort for them because many of them they were not very fluent, but they give it a try. At the end, they said, "Please do a project like this. Please, we love what we did." And the conclusion of that exercise was they were presented at the consulate of Nogales and the consulate of Nogales in Sonora and
Nogales. They're both
and
Nogales.
it was truly something that I would appreciate because they still see me and they say, "Ay, queremos más, queremos más." So,
Now that's a love story, finally.
It's a love story.
Okay, Jose Ignacio, you have the final word.
Wow, what a challenge. If I was Harry Potter. Well, I will reimagine the Mexico-United States relation based on 3 new principles. One, I will create a bilateral relation focused on common development goal, but particularly complementarity, meaning that the United States needs Mexico and Mexico needs the United States. I think that NAFTA and after NAFTA, the USMCA, because they were product of the free trade idea, the problem with free trade is that when you have free trade between unequal partners, the result is inequality. Complementarity means moving beyond free trade. Second, I will reimagine an institutional framework. I love this idea of being experimental. And you know, at the Harvard Kennedy School, I have been working on this, and there is a book by Benedict Anderson, Imagine Communities. You know that the state is nothing more than imagined community. So we need to go beyond conventional traditions of the state. When I talk about a post-global order, just to be clear, a post-global order does not denies or goes against globalization. It moves beyond globalization. So this idea that the state have a territory and a sovereignty, well, that could work, you know, in the 18th century or so, but today that doesn't make any sense. And lastly, third, I will use this bilateral and constructive relation to build capabilities in Mexico. Many, if not all of the problems that we have been talking today, migration, security, has to do with state fragility. That is one of the gigantic problems that we have in Latin America. And because, quoting Asimov and Robinson, we have a region of paper leviathans, meaning very fragile state we have a pervasive inequality that undermines democracy. However, because I am Harry Potter, I will not repeat the mistake of trying to build capabilities in a top-down strategy, meaning that the United States have these rule of law ideas, translate the federality into Spanish, and they say to Mexico, this is what you have to do. Follow Madison, period. That doesn't work. And you know, this idea that the rule of law doesn't work in Latin America, I raise my hand and say, well, yeah, maybe because in Latin America we do not have such a thing like a rule of law. This is an Anglo-Saxon idea. Yeah? So United States could help to build capabilities from a bottom-up perspective. And that will create prosperity and happiness in Mexico, and maybe someday, happiness. Maybe someday, and I'm Harry Potter, if I am successful in this plan, maybe we'll be able to find a real good tacos al pastor here in Boston.
I think that's a Dumbledore. Right?
Yeah, I got
all right. Well,
Dumbledore.
thanks to my colleagues for a very enjoyable evening, and thanks to all of you for coming. We look forward to seeing you at future events.